and welcome back to another episode of the Property Trio. It's great to be sitting here with my two fabulous co-hosts, Mike and Dave. How are you both?
Really well, thanks, Cate.
I'm doing well. You know what? I've been on a mission to find your book at airports, and I've been to Newcastle and Adelaide Airport. Now, either they're there and I have some severe issues, otherwise they're selling out. I can't find them. I'm trying to take a photo to send to you.
That could have happened. They might have sold out, or you might just be having a boy look.
It's 50-50.
Well, not all books are in the bookshops in airports. Are they in a fair few airports that you're aware of, Cate?
They're in Newslink and WH Smith at the airports, and they're in Dimmicks in the cities.
Right.
So, yeah, clearly I owe Newcastle and Adelaide people a huge shout out and a thanks for buying the books off the shelf because they were in the airport.
Yeah, I know you saw it in Newcastle, but I couldn't. I looked twice, but I am a boy, as you say.
Well, thanks for that, Mike. You've made my morning. Today, we're diving into a topic that Dave selected, and it's rentvesting. And we're sitting here marvelling that we've done 260-something episodes, and we haven't done one on rentvesting. So it's been a long time waiting, and you've done a great job, and I'm really proud to be hosting it. So,
it was on the early shortlist, wasn't it? Rentvesting, and somehow we've managed to keep it up our sleeve until now.
Yeah, I'm hoping that we don't get listeners writing in saying you idiots, you've already done this, but I don't think we have. Rentvesting is a strategy that's been gaining traction. It's especially relevant for those who are trying to climb the property ladder without sacrificing their lifestyle. And we've all heard the phrase rentvesting, but rarely are the pros and cons and key considerations dissected and discussed. Now, dissecting and discussing is something that we love to do. As with any investment strategy, it has its advantages and drawbacks. Rentvesting isn't for everyone, but many people don't even consider it, which may be to the detriment of their finances or their lifestyle. Maintaining an open mind to rentvesting and exploring its potential will provide you with greater clarity on your pathway forward, whether you take that path or cross it off as an option. So, Dave, can you start by explaining what rentvesting is and why it's becoming a popular strategy among first home buyers in particular, as well as potential upgraders?
Sure, Cate. So, firstly, rentvesting is a strategy where individuals rent the property they live in while purchasing an investment property or properties elsewhere. So, this approach allows people to, number one, live in a more desirable location to suit their preferred lifestyle without the burden of a large mortgage, whilst still getting a foot or multiple feet on the property ladder through buying investment properties to obviously grow your wealth and earn additional income. Now, this can also set you up to then leapfrog into your preferred home down the track. So our love of property and desire to have a place that we can call our own, shaped to our own preferences and provide stability for us and our family, means that most people are only willing to pay so much in rent before they purchase a home. And a lot of people just want to purchase a home. So this is one of the reasons it is often more affordable to rent than take out a mortgage and buy a home, especially in highly sought after locations in capital cities. And this is also reflected in the fact that around 2/3 of all properties in Australia are owned by owner-occupiers. Many other countries that there's a much higher percentage of investors who own properties. So the concept of rentvesting has been around for quite some time, but as you just touched on, it's gained more attention in the last 5 to 10 years, particularly as property prices in the inner and middle suburbs of major cities have continued to become more expensive relative to incomes, which we'll touch on a bit later.
Yeah.
With more sophisticated property planning tools available, such as the software we use with our clients to model financial outcomes right through to retirement, people are becoming more aware of rentvesting as a viable strategy to manage their finances and property goals.
Yeah, awesome. And it's interesting. I'm sure you're experiencing this in your business too, Dave. The conversation does come up. So the understanding is certainly out there. And, I've seen rentvesting discussed probably 10 to 15 years ago was when it it's started to become a bit of a word. And
Yeah.
you're absolutely right. People do get it wrong. They don't delve into what it really means. They don't understand it. And I'm really loving some of the parts of this topic that we'll canvass today, because it's not all about warning bells. It's just about making a really good educated decision with the right information.
Yeah, absolutely. It's certainly becoming much more prevalent, we're finding, with first-time buyers as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah. Well, Mike, what are some of the key benefits of rent vesting for property buyers?
Flexibility is a big one because, you can move around a little bit more. Like the cost of getting in and out of property from an owner occupying point of view would make it absolutely mad to sort of live 12 months in one place or 2 or 3 years in another place. Dave, help me out on this one because I've just done a little bit of a feasibility here. 6.5% interest rate. Is that a reasonable PPOR just for hypothetical reasons?
Yeah, hypothetical, around the mark, 6.5 to low sixes.
So I'm actually rent vesting at the moment, and I've crunched the numbers on a 6.5% loan on my valuation of the property that I'm staying in. I'm actually paying 60% of the cost as a renter than what I would be paying to own the property. So obviously it's heavily negatively geared. Would I want to buy something like this? Absolutely not, because it would cost an absolute fortune, and I don't necessarily think it's a good investment property. But when you're rent vesting, you don't have to worry about that. When I purchase a property to live in, I always kind of think, this still has a job to do. I still want it to grow. I still want it to be investment grade property. But when you're rent vesting, you can go, you know what, I'm going to live in a high rise apartment that I would never buy as an investment property. So I think that's a big part of it. Also, you might live in a location where the potential upside from a capital growth point of view just isn't there. I mean, like I sort of asked this question of people, you've bought an investment property in the same suburb, what are the chances that you just happen to live in the best performing suburb in the whole of Australia for capital growth? It's very, very unlikely, right? And by the same token, wherever you live and you choose to live might not have the best fundamentals nationally. So as a rent vestor, you can go, all right, well, I'm going to live here and I'm going to park my money somewhere else where it's going to get, a lot better performance. I think another benefit is that it can be a real stepping stone. And you mentioned it before, Dave, that a lot of first home buyers are rent vesting first so that they can build up a little bit of a war chest, because where they need to buy, they might not necessarily have the ability to save for a deposit in a shorter time frame. So it could actually strategically be way better to go, I'm going to buy an investment property and I'm going to get to the point where the equity that I get in that, I'm actually going to park into the property that I purchased for myself. And you look, I think it's one of those sort of try before you buy things as well, right? Like you can purchase in a market that you've done the research on, but you can rent in a location and say, is this somewhere where I might want to buy? Because of course there are benefits to owning the property, which we'll cover later, but rent vesting enables you to just sort of dip your toe in the water and get a sense of, is this somewhere where I could see myself?
I just love that. You touched on one that I think is awesome, Mike, and that is being able to rent that property that is a bad investment, but it's going to be a really fun short-term lifestyle. If I was able to rent vest and do this again in my early 20s, I would love to be in a cool high-rise property with pools and gyms and in the heart of everything, on a busy road where the trams are just out the front. Like, all of that would be really fun, but I wouldn't want to buy it.
Mm.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great example of one of the lifestyle options you can select when you're rent vesting, particularly might be one when you're younger, or also when you're a bit older and maybe you've empty nested.
Yeah.
So Cate, can you explain why rent vesting might be more affordable, especially in high cost cities like Sydney and Melbourne?
Yes, I can. And if we have a look at our yield charts from a couple of shows back when we recorded our market update, this will help answer. But in short, cities like Sydney and Melbourne have very high, prohibitively high property prices, especially if you're looking to get into the inner and middle ring suburbs. And as you know, Dave, a lot of people are really keen to secure their family home, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they're able to completely afford it, or they may not want to live in the burbs yet. So this is an answer that is often given to people who are contemplating Sydney and Melbourne and expensive cities. They might be suburbs that buyers grew up in, or areas where they'd like to live and raise a family. They might have been relatively affordable for their parents, but with the continuation of population growth and urban sprawl, our nation's desirability as a place to live and our relative wealth per capita versus the rest of the world, it's becoming more challenging than what it was for our parents. So it's become less attainable for many, especially at a younger age, and this might make it difficult to remain near family and friends from your childhood. Rental returns are generally driven by the dwelling, while capital growth is generally driven by the land value. So a saying that I always use is tenants rent dwelling, they don't rent land. They might pay a tiny proportion more for a big backyard than a small backyard, but generally speaking, a tenant will opt for the property that suits them, and the price that they pay is determined by the size of the dwelling, the age of the dwelling, and the bells and whistles of the dwelling. Better located properties are usually closer to the CBD or the ocean or the bay. I call out to Pete, we miss you, Pete, or by a major river, and therefore they have higher land value. This means that the rental cost or the return as an investor relative to the overall value of the property is much lower, and this is what's known as the yield of the property. So when we look at the yield charts for the various capital cities and regions, we can see that Melbourne and Sydney are among some of the tightest, smallest yields. And that's because the prices are higher and the rents as a function of the price is lower. This often makes the middle ring suburbs in a Sydney or Melbourne or other capital city more affordable to rent in than to purchase in and take out a mortgage. So, for example, simplifying things, a standalone house below the median price of a given location or in a regional centre may be more likely to achieve an annual rental return of 4% of the value of the property after costs, whereas a standalone house in the inner or middle ring, a higher cost home, may only receive a rental return of 3%, 2%, or even in the high 1% in Melbourne and Sydney. So that's a great illustration, because if you're paying 6% for the cost of the money and you're only getting 1.8, 1.9, 2% back on it, well, clearly that property will be very expensive for the investor to run.
Yeah.
The tenant who's enjoying it, they're getting a discounted roof over their head compared to if they had a mortgage on that house.
Yeah, 100%. And it's ultimately because, as you touched on, people tend to pay for rent relative to the dwelling they're living in. And as we know, the cost of the land and the land value in those capital cities, and particularly Sydney and Melbourne, is so high. And that's why you get that disparity, isn't it, between the rental yields in particularly in Melbourne and Sydney and in those inner suburbs. But you hope that if you're going to invest there, the trade-off is the capital growth.
Absolutely. But for some investors, they can't afford that. And it's an interesting thought. Some investors, with their ability to service and the income that they're getting, they are better suited to go for something that has a higher cash flow element, so a higher yield. And they might accept that they won't get outperformance capital growth, but they'll get a blend of growth and yield. And at the same time, they can live in the hot city that they love and enjoy that roof over their head for a price tag that's much lower than having a mortgage on it.
Yeah. And even if they could wear the cost on that from a negative geared point of view, it might mean that when they go to buy their second or their third investment property, it's the bank's like, no, this is not going to happen. And I think that's an important thing to think of as well. Like you might go, oh, yeah, negatively geared property, but I believe in the capital growth prospects, but it might actually shut you down from a serviceability point of view because the bank can see that you're having to dip into your pocket, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So, Dave, as our resident number cruncher, I think it'd be helpful if you could further illustrate these concepts. And can you share with our listeners a live example of renting versus purchasing in a blue chip suburb?
Yes, certainly can, Cate. So I thought I'd take a look at Hawthorne East, where I live, and Anne-Marie and I just selected Anne-Marie actually selected it, a random property as a case study example of just how rentvesting is less expensive from a cash flow perspective. And we've obviously sort of touched on this already, but here's a specific example for our listeners. So firstly, Hawthorn East is considered as a desirable location for a number of reasons, such as proximity to highly sought after schools. It's easy access to the city, tree-lined streets, period homes, plenty of playgrounds, parks, ovals, and recreation facilities. There's sizable blocks of lands available, good access to public transport, and access to great local shops, restaurants, and cafes such as the Camberwell Junction, Glenferrie Road, and High Street. So it ticks all the boxes. So if we start with the current median for all properties, so that's houses and units in the suburb, as the reference point, it's currently around 2.4 million. So
doing it tough there, Dave, aren't you? In Hawthorn East. Just absolutely on the breadline.
Mike, he couldn't afford to move to in a suburb of Sydney, though. So, all right, let's move right along, Mike. So the selected property, I won't disclose the address.
Nice house, though.
Yeah, it's a double fronted terrace home built in the early 1900s. It's definitely got a pretty facade. It's a detached dwelling, 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, 1 car spot. It's on about 560 square metres. Now, it is right next door to the train line, and this certainly has kept the sale price down. So this property sold for 2.675 mil in March this year. So it's 300,000 over the median for all dwellings, but it's actually below the median value for houses. So the first example I would use is if you were someone who, say, potentially a first-time buyer and you were trying to get in and borrow 95% of the value of the property, you'd need to have about $350,000 in savings, plus some high income or combined incomes. Your loan amount would be about 2.54 million. And so at a typical interest rate of 6.6% for owner-occupied P&I, your monthly repayment would be a whopping $16,230 a month. So that's going to bite into your surplus cash flow right there. So
surplus on that, Dave. Gosh, again, like just tough in Hawthorn East with the surplus paying 16 grand a month.
You're having toast and baked beans for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. So obviously that's a reasonably pricey entry point. So let's look at, okay, let's say you'd probably let's say saved up, invested in shares or other property, and then you've sold and you've been able to borrow only 80%. Your loan amount would be 2.14 million. Interest rate gets lower when you're at an 80% LVR, so 6.1%. So your repayments would be ballpark down from 16,000 to about 13,000, and you would have had to contribute about $650 to $700,000. Now, if we contrast this, we've done a rental estimate on this particular property. The rent is only about $5,150 a month. So
wow,
it's a huge difference.
Based on nearly $1,200 a week, I'd totally agree with that.
Yeah, so like if you look at borrowing 95% to get into that property, $16,000 a month. Borrowing 80%, $13,000 a month. Renting $5,000 a month.
Yeah.
So, in fact, you'd have to borrow about a third of the value of the property, 32%, for a loan amount of about $850,000 to get your mortgage down to that amount. That would mean you'd have to have $2 million in savings or sale proceeds to get into the market there at the same cost of renting.
That's that's just insane. And that's, I mean, Hawthorn East, of course, we're talking blue chip area, but there's plenty of blue chip areas across Melbourne and, of course, every other capital city. But to me, that illustrates it perfectly, right? These are places that you probably can't afford to buy unless you're on a very, very good wicket, like Dave here. If you are a relative of Dave, you haven't heard from him for a while, send him
Mate, I'm getting old. I'm almost 50. Takes you a long time.
And you know, in that number too, like you're talking a little bit under the median rental for that example, and I guess it just goes to show that you know, the more desirable property in the suburbs that are lived in by owner occupiers, but it highlights the point of why it's much more affordable to live in that location because of the cost and the cash flow disparity. Because, you know, let's say you can afford that property. I mean, you know, that might absolutely cap you out. Whereas if you kind of think, well, I want to live there, but I want the freedom to invest elsewhere because I want a little bit more cash flow, or I actually don't think Hawthorne East is going to give the best possible growth of everywhere else in the country, then you can go and live in there and you get all the same rights. You can go to the same cafe, you can walk your dog down the same streets. And to Kate's point earlier, that the higher cost home may only receive a rental return of 2 to 3%. In this example, the rental yield on that property that you gave is 2.33%. So it's in that kind of ballpark. And it's what we typically see in capital cities in these blue chip areas, right?
Yeah, and look, that's why I chose it. I mean, it's obviously a prime example that illustrates the point of how it is much more affordable to rent vest, particularly in these types of locations. Until you've worked your way up in your career, you know, running a business, you know, you've probably owned previous properties or invested in shares for a long time. You're probably on dual incomes, etc., to be able to get into these types of locations for a family home.
Yeah, the case study wasn't suggesting this is a bog standard first home buyer purchase, right?
No.
Dave, the difference between affordability of renting versus buying in a blue chip suburb can be quite staggering, as we've just pointed out. Can you tell us how affordability in blue chip suburbs has changed over time? And was it always this difficult to get into a highly sought after suburb?
Yeah, so look, this is the other point I think that we're making a bit here, and why rent vesting has become more prevalent and more of a consideration for people. So, look, again, if using this case study, if we take this specific property, we found a sale for it in 1985 for $162,500. So, it would have been nice to buy that property back then, wouldn't it?
Well, I looked at that and Googled my house at the same time. I live in sunny Yarraville, and gentrification has been the hallmark there. In 1970, I'll tell you, in 1977, so a bit before 85, my house sold for 24,750.
Right. Yeah. There you go.
I'm prepared to double that as an offer right now, Cate.
And build the time machine as well.
Yeah.
Don't you wish?
So if we look at 1985, we looked at the average annual earnings for an Australian full-time worker was $20,482. So relative to this property that we've used in the case study, it's about the cost of the property was about 8 times the average annual wage. Now we fast forward to today, that property is now worth $2.675 million. The average full-time wage is $98,217. So that's about 27 times now more expensive than a full annual wage of a full timer. So look, that's gone from 8 times the cost for a full time wage to 27 times, which is a huge sum of money. And I mean, look, even if we say there was 40% of households were on dual incomes back then, in today it's about 65%. So, you know, there's a big jump, but it's not huge, but there's certainly been a sizable jump. So even if you assume it's a dual income house, it's still about 13.6 times the average double wage versus 8 times the single wage back in 1985. So whichever way you look at it, it's certainly much harder to own if you're basing it purely on the average income than it was, 30 years ago. And that sort of trend seems to be continuing.
Yeah. That average annual wage of a full timer at 98,217, is that for your electorate?
No, I think I actually read. I think numbers just came out recently, but Anne Marie looked this up. I think it's high 90s. I think even somewhere it's been stated as having slightly cracked 100,000
Interesting.
now.
Yeah, because we look at
Because
average.
I was surprised by that number as well, and I don't
Yes.
know if there's a difference whether it's the average, like the mean average versus the median, but there have been numbers floated around high 90s or even low hundreds now as an average wage.
Yeah. Amazing.
That might, because that does sound a little bit too high. Because if you put everyone that's in on part-time hours, that's a huge cohort of the Australian population.
Yeah, that's the average annual wage for full-time employment.
That makes more sense.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yes, because we hear about average incomes being considerably lower, almost half that, and obviously that's taking into account part-time work,
Part-time and
maybe
casual
entitlements.
Yeah, both of those were full-time averages, the average salary of full-time workers.
Right.
Yeah.
I can remember a time where that was a lot of money. I remember studying real estate, and my teacher sort of said, I had a student in here and his goal was to earn, six-figure salary. And we're all like, whoa, did he get there? Like, yeah, he got there. And we're like, go that guy. Maybe one day if I dream big enough, that can be me.
Yeah.
And that's the power of inflation, isn't it?
Exactly.
You need 27.7 times to buy into Leafy Hawthorne East. Mike, given that it's so difficult to get into highly sought-after locations, why isn't Rentvesting considered more often?
I was just kind of thinking, like, I should go and rent in Hawthorne East and have outrageous parties next door to Dave's. Any rentals available? It's probably pretty tightly held, I'm guessing, in that location.
If you're from Newcastle, we don't let you in the suburbs, Mike.
I thought as much. Cate, to answer your question, I think part of the sort of psyche of Australians is home ownership. Like, we are a real estate obsessed nation. So I can remember doing heaps and heaps of inspections where tenants kind of explained to me while I looked around the investment property why they were tenants. It's like, oh, I'm only renting because I'm building a house, or I'm only renting here, but I own an investment property somewhere else. So there is still, to this day, a very palpable sense of you being a second-class citizen as a renter. And I think Rentvesting, you talked about it, coming into vogue, 10 or 15 years ago. It was probably a way better time to be a rentvestor then compared to the last little while, because of course we've seen a huge increase in rents. But even with that baked in Dave's example, it's still much more beneficial to be a renter than a homeowner. I think a big part of it is being able to make the little tweaks and changes. So, for example, in my property, like, there's no hook, so I've got my hat on the little rail that the garage door thing slides on, right? And you got to put it in just the right spot, or you'll need a new hat. And certainty is a big thing as well, because people don't want to kind of think that they could be upended and get a notice in the post to say, you look, in 90 days you have to leave. And moving is painful as well. I've never met anyone that says, oh, I love packing up the gear every, year or two and moving somewhere else. Like, the thought fills me with panic, to the extent that I often don't even unpack, even moving into properties that I've owned. I'm like, I've got boxes from like 5 moves ago, because I just hate doing it. This is not financial or life advice, obviously. And that's expensive as well. But I think, like, the main one is, well, the main two, I should say, is kind of education. I don't think people necessarily understand the numbers, and Dave's example will go a brilliant way to solving that issue. But the big one that I wanted to kind of mention as to why Rentvesting is probably suboptimal, Dave has already kind of put in the script. It's that there's a real superpower in a principal place of residence as a wealth generation vehicle because of the CGT exemption, right? So in your principal place of residence, you can buy it for $1 million, you can sell it for $2 million, and it's capital gains tax free. Whereas with an investment property, if you're selling it within 12 months, you don't get any discount. But let's say most people will hold it for 12 months or more, you get a 50% exemption, and then it's still only taxed at your marginal rate. estate, but we're talking big sums of money. So that's why I was talking about before, when I buy a principal place of residence, I do kind of want it to perform, because I know whatever growth it achieves, one day down the track, it'll be sold and I won't be paying tax on that gain. And that's what you really kind of miss out on if you're renting. And of course, if you're owning that property and you're paying it off, you are getting that upside. As a tenant, if that property grows in value, you don't have any claim over that equity. It would be bloody nice if you did, but that's just not how it works.
Yeah, and look, it's also exempt from the age pension. And now there's superannuation incentives whereby you can put a significant sum from the sale of a family home into your super, which has other tax advantages as well. So, yeah, there are multiple sort of financial benefits with the family home.
Yeah. Back to the question, you were sharing some of the reasons why more people don't do it, Mike, and I've got a couple of extras. One is that some people just feel like there's a stigma with being a tenant. And I know if I said to my mum and dad 10, 15 years ago, I've got a great idea for you, you could make considerable money and you could have the lifestyle you want and fill up that nest egg, they would have said no to rent vesting. So I didn't talk to them about it, even though it probably would have been a good idea. And the other one is actually about someone who has educated themselves around the risks and the benefits. And they've made that decision that if they go into rent vesting, their ability to buy their family home will then be negatively impacted. So the decision that they've made is, I don't want to do that. I actually want to be able to buy my family home when I can, even if it's not right now. And there are a lot of clients that I've assisted over the years that have rent vested, and then for whatever reason, they've unraveled their strategy. And it's usually been because they've decided to buy a home. Even though they told me at the time, that's not important, I'm happy to rent for the long term. All they need to do is have a change of heart. That can be precipitated by a relationship. It can be precipitated by a job in a new area, or just a newfound feeling of, I actually need to lay down my roots and I want something I can call my own. And that's when rent vesting can come undone.
Do you think, sorry, Cate?
When they've committed to something and that the tenure that they've held it for is insufficient. And I think anything under 10 years is not great, and anything under 5 years is absolutely insufficient, because you're just whittling away all of your gains with your stamp duty, your selling costs, your agents' fees, marketing, and then, as Dave said earlier, your capital gains tax. So there's no point doing this if it's not for the long term. It's a waste of money.
Do you think also that people might kind of fear the fact that if they're rent vesting, they're going to forego first home buyer grants? Do you think that kind of enters into the psyche? Because we know about loss aversion, that as human beings, we are much likely to feel the pain of losing out on something than the joy of the positive upside, right? So the idea of like, we're going to rent vest, but we're setting fire to this first home buyer grant. I wonder if that changes people's minds.
The beauty of rent vesting is if you haven't lived in it at all, you've bought it primarily as your investment, you preserve your first home owner's opportunities. So you can still get those benefits. But the reality is, if someone's rent vesting and they're potentially buying where they'd ultimately like to live but not right now, they're probably spending a bit more than the minimum amount, than the maximum amount that you get benefits
the threshold,
from anyway. If you're putting all of your money into a basic home in a great area, but you can't afford to live in it, you need the tenant and the taxman to help you hold that, and then you're living at home or you're renting something really tiny or really old or whatever it might be to keep your cash flows down on what you're renting, then you've probably already surpassed the purchase price where you would get those first homeowner benefits anyway. So the argument could be had that you were never going to get first homeowner grants anyway if you're going straight for that high performance property.
If they're educated, they'll come to learn that they can own investment properties and still be eligible for first homeowner grants or benefits, as long as they haven't lived in one of those investment properties and turned it into their home.
Yeah. Dave, finally, how can someone determine if rent vesting is the right strategy for them?
Yeah, so look, you've just touched on a couple of the areas there, Cate. So some of the key things you need to consider is how long are you willing to rentvest for, which you just sort of touched on. I mean, as you discussed, like this is a big one. I mean, if your time horizon is less than 5 to 10 years, you really run the risk of having to sell before earning enough profit to make the process worthwhile due to the entry and exit costs. You also run the risk of mistiming the market, which we covered in the recent episode number 261, Recovering from Buying a Lemon. And so you leave yourself open to the whim of the market cycles. And, people, and as you just mentioned, I've seen people as similarly go into with the idea I'll rent vest for a long time, but then change their opinion, their mind, life changes down the track, and they end up selling. And I think people often underestimate the time horizon you need to be willing to commit to rent vest for, which is something we covered a lot in older property plans when we were writing out the property plans for people before we moved to just solely the software solution. If you do plan to purchase a home down the track, you need to have a plan for how much you will pay, if you will sell or strive to retain all your existing properties, and ensure that your mortgage strategy is aligned with your long-term property plan. Otherwise, again, you run the risk that purchasing the home will not be affordable within your preferred timeline, and or you might sell a property or properties you hadn't planned on selling. You also, really importantly, and this sort of goes into where people can change their mind, is you need to ensure both you and your partner, if you have one, are on the same page. As I've shared a number of times over the podcast journey, and Cate, you and I have talked about, often one party is more happy to focus on investing while the other party is keen to nest and find a long-term family home, especially when there are children involved. So this is something you want to resolve early on, because it can cause serious strains on a relationship if one of you is unhappy with the pathway that you've selected. And then if you're a first-time buyer, this pathway may enable you to purchase the home you're after or get into your preferred location by first purchasing the property as an investment. That then turns into your home or is a stepping stone to amass equity to get into the long-term home. And that's certainly a strategy that we're seeing and applying more often than I would say I ever have in now 25 years in property and mortgages. So, and I think that's a function of where prices are sitting, particularly in the capital cities, and obviously where our business tends to operate. But look, ultimately, the right decision for you may not be the right decision for someone else. We're all unique, and your property plan should be as well.
Really well said. Thank you, Dave. The notes have been fantastic, and I've loved this topic. And we've had a great episode on the pros, the cons, and the different considerations for rent vesting. Add into the show notes an article that Dave wrote for the advice section on Domain, which is called Why Rent Vesting is More Affordable Than Buying a Home to Live In and Why It's Not for Everyone. Now, on that note, let's head into our gold nuggets.
Now it's time for us to go mining for our gold nugget property tip of the day.
So my gold nugget is, my advice is to carefully consider your own personal situation and goals. Rent vesting can provide financial and lifestyle flexibility, but it's certainly not for everyone. Make sure your property strategy aligns with your personal circumstances and your partner, if you have one's long-term aspirations. We certainly all have different circumstances, goals and aspirations, so it only makes sense that your property decisions should be informed by these. Each property purchase and sale includes a significant outlay, which is why you want to be clear from the outset on your goals and your strategy for the short term and how this feeds into your retirement. This will minimize having the major cost and hassle of having to sell and buy at a time multiple times that doesn't suit you financially. It's often neglected how our next purchase will impact any future purchases. So take the time to carefully plan your property decisions ahead of time, as this is critical to making choices that you do not come to regret, and this is equally so if you're choosing the path of rent vesting.
I've got an analogy, Cate, but just before you panic, it's not sporting. It's actually cars, right? So we talked a couple of episodes. Nah, come on, Dave. Come on, Dave. We talked a couple of episodes ago about you kind of zooming around Newcastle in my sports car the other day. Yeah. Now, I'm going to the mountains on the weekend, and I can assure you that sports car will not even get on that dirt road where we're going. So for that reason, I have an old Jeep Wrangler with huge big tires, and it'll go four-wheel drive, and it'll do wonderful things. I think asking the sports car to do that is a silly notion. And I think asking the place where you want to be, your home, where you want to live, which is a completely different thing to an investment, to be the investment as well, is perhaps setting yourself up for failure, or it's suboptimal at the very least, right? So where you want to live is kind of informed by all sorts of emotions about being safe and proximity locations. They're not investment fundamentals. So the real power of rent vesting is you can live wherever you want to live, but you invest where the fundamentals are telling you you're going to get the best results.
I love it. I've got a little gold nugget, even though I'm the host today, and it's actually about a real-life case study. Dave, I assisted one of your property planning clients about a year and a half ago, and they were rent vesting out of circumstance and sensibility. They were not living in Melbourne at the moment, but ultimately they want to live in Melbourne. And what they did was had me select or help them select a future home for them. And they're rent vesting. Now, the future home, though, it was a really important discussion to have with them, that they've got to look at the location and the broad style and size of the home, but not really look beyond that, because right now it's someone else's home. They've got a tenant, and that's the tenant's home. And their needs may change between now and when they move back to Melbourne. So they had to look for something that had the option for future potential. So an extension or changes, cosmetic, whatever it might be. So the important thing, the piece that I'm trying to bring home today, is that if that's your strategy to rent vest and to put your money into something that could be a future home for you, don't get too caught up on the nitty-gritty. Just make sure you get location and street and style of the home and broad size of the land right, because you can always change it once you're in it.
Yeah, it's a great example. That example for first-time buyers, isn't it, who are considering buying an investment property that could become the home.
Yeah. Well, on that note, it's been a really fun app, and I look forward to seeing you fellas next week.
See you then.
See you next week.